Be part of it.
Absolutely. So thank you, Steve, for
Thank you.
mentioning that. I appreciate that. Now I'll be quiet.
And Joe says he's Irish, so he doesn't need a microphone.
And I can't imagine Julie ever being quiet. So that's a good thing. Listen, my name is Joe Urban. I work with the Institute. I'm also a partner at Clark Hill. And I can't tell you how privileged I am to be with you guys today to talk about governance. Through the Institute, I go all over the country doing strategic planning, board training, this type of thing. We're actually designing the Texas Charter Schools Association governance track for them to talk about how boards can look at how they're performing, what they're doing, how they can make things work for kids. So we're going to have a couple. This is supposed to be interactive. It really is supposed to be interactive. And when I say that, I'm going to make it interactive because we're all going to swap our little seats at some point when we do our tabletop exercises to make sure we've got a good mix of folks that are going to be able to give some good diversity of ideas. So I noticed there are a couple tables, like we got two folks here, we got two folks back there. I'm going to try to kind of get folks together and report out on their schools and what they're doing, good things. Sound good? All right. So this is, really I've got two sessions this morning. They're two 45-minute blocks, and instead of just doing two discrete sessions, what I've done is I've combined them into one deck, which is Win for Kids Through Purposeful Planning and Stay the Course by Evaluating the Path. The first section is designed to give you an overview and build a vocabulary, building on what Jason had shared with you guys yesterday, building on what Julie was just talking to you guys about this morning. What do we need to do? How do we plan purposefully to win for kids? Because that's what this is all about. The second brings it all together and is going to use that vocabulary to put us in the mindset to be able to conduct an evaluation of our ESP, CMO, an evaluation of ourselves as a board and as board members, and an evaluation of our school leader. So I'm not going to send you out the door this morning with an evaluation tool. I'm not going to send you out the door this morning with any specific rubric that you're going to be able to use to evaluate them. What happens is Lake State has provided you guys with an ESP and a board evaluation document to look at. My job this morning is to kind of, when I used to be in the Army, we had 50 caliber machine guns, and you would have to adjust the headspace and timing. Essentially, a 50 caliber machine gun is a big piston, and if you don't adjust the spring correctly, the spring will pop out the back and do all sorts of damage. So we just want to adjust our headspace and timing to make sure that when we look at these reports, when we look at these reviews, that we'll be able to use them purposefully. Does that sound like a fair proposition this morning? Is there anything you guys want to know or give me jumping into this to kind of help me go through this deck? Yes, sir. What do you want to know? Oh, it sounds very good. So something you guys asked yesterday before I get into the deck was what is the difference, or who asked the question, what is the difference, or what's the spectrum of schools that are self-managed versus schools that are managed by management companies? Does anybody remember that question yesterday? No? Okay, we're going to give you an answer. I'm going to give you the answer today. Schools fly across a whole spectrum of management. The one irreducible requirement is that you as board members take an oath of public office, and you as board members are the folks that ensure that the school is performing within the parameters of its charter contract and the policies that you adopt. How that gets implemented is the secret sauce, quite frankly, that as board members you expect from your management. So there are really two flavors of management for schools. There are schools that are, quote, self-managed, and self-managed is somewhat of a misnomer because there are very few boards now that employ their staff directly. You know, and I'm going to refer to staff, the team, and the ops team, the operational team throughout this presentation, somewhat interchangeably. There are very few boards that do that because if you make the decision to employ your staff directly, you pay 26% of your payroll into the Michigan Teacher Retirement System right now. So most boards have made the choice that their operational team, from the school leader on down, are going to be employed by a third party. So then you break that down into two questions. The third party might be a full-service management company that's going to come in and run the school completely under the watchfly of the board, or the school is going to be run through a third-party staffing company that simply is going to provide the team that's going to maintain the operational control of the school district under the watchfly of the board. And those are two somewhat critical distinctions. A full-service management company can charge you upwards of 15% because they've got a mothership somewhere. Who mentioned they have Grand National Heritage School here? Okay, the National Heritage Schools have this remarkable mothership in Grand Rapids. They call it the Operations Center, where they have this incredible staff that's employed that do all this stuff for the school and basically run it on behalf of the board. If it's a third-party staffing company, basically the school is being run out of the school and it's not being run anywhere else. So there's a little bit more feeling of a little bit more local control, a little bit more responsiveness to the direct, questions of the board. Full-service staffing company or management company can charge you from 15% to all of your state aid at the end of the school year. Staffing company can charge you, maybe 0.3 to 0.5% of your gross payroll. But there are trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs in that process. The trade-offs are you better get it right at the local level if you're dealing with a third-party staffing company because it's all in the school. It is not in a mothership somewhere. And the trade-off of having, the mothership, the service center, and all these other good things is it's a little bit more remote. You're going to see your servicing rep, at the board meetings, and there are processes that folks like to go through. So there are trade-offs for either one of those. And I know that was a big question folks had yesterday and wanted to address it, so there you have it. I like this little guy because I think he really embodies what we're doing. This little guy was what attracted me to the Institute in the first place, because in many ways what we're doing as board members, what we're doing in the charter school movement is we're strapping on our plywood wings and we're reaching for the stars. We don't have the institutional memory that K-12 school districts had. We don't have the institutional memory that the school districts in which you guys are located, right, the constituent K-12 districts, have from processes and procedures that stretch back to the beginning of time. And that too has its trade-offs. The good thing is it gives us room to innovate. One of the trade-offs that comes with that is that we have to try to invent the wheel, every time we've got transition in board members, from founding boards that transition into operational boards and the whole 9 yards.
Joe?
Yeah.
That's all.
No.
I'm going to add it anyway.
Okay.
Joe is so all in that he said for Halloween next year,
I'm going to be that
he's
little
going to be
guy.
the guy. He's going to be the kid. He's going to put the wings on. He's going to put the helmet on. And he's going to be the guy.
Yeah, I think I like it. So, win for kids through purposeful planning. I'm going to look at this first section, this module, the big picture questions. And I'm going to begin with the proposition that charter school governance is a paradox. Why is it a paradox? It leads back to this trade-off that I talked to you about. We have the ability to appoint folks based on, or have the university appoint folks based on their prudence. We believe that they'll be prudent board members. We believe that every one of you who's in this room has gone through an insanely rigorous vetting process that the university has put forward in order to make sure that you have the foundational skills required to be a good public steward. So every one of you comes in with that process. What you haven't done, except for Elizabeth here, what you haven't done is had to stand an election. What you haven't done is had to go through the hurly-burly of the political process that really makes you think on your feet, answer tough questions, figure out how you're going to develop and please constituencies. There are trade-offs in this paradox. One of the trade-offs is, and I'd love your thoughts on this if I'm not putting you on the spot, Elizabeth, but one of the trade-offs is that you get folks that don't have to go through an election process so we can actually try to find the best people to put on the bus, talking about Covey and Collins. The other trade-off is that because you haven't gone through the election, you don't get
The constituents' point of view.
you don't get the constituents' point of view.
Yeah.
You don't get the
Listening to
constituent.
people is key.
And as board members, when you come in, you're now trying to figure out, without having gone through this pretest, how do I listen to people? How do I build a consensus? How do I try to communicate these issues in ways that people can understand, right? And so that's where the strategic planning process and working with the ops team becomes key. So what we're going to do is we're going to examine the need for collaboration. You guys are all, I'm seeing you, very collaborative folks in dealing with this. We're going to talk about how collaboration works in the spectrum of strategic design, strategic planning, and evaluation, which is a unique species of collaboration. It requires a fair amount of discipline. It's just a different discipline than what you guys all have in your professional lives coming forward. We're going to do some tabletop exercises, which is where I'm going to kind of break you guys up and mix and match. And then we're going to go into the next module after a short break. There's a lot of text here, but I've essentially told you this is the paradox. There's a lot of literature on this. There is a lot of professional studies on this. The biggest criticism that our critics level at us that's shot through those pre-press articles is that our boards are not accountable. And to be honest with you, every time somebody tells me that, I tell them, I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know what planet they're coming from. You're some of the most accountable people I've ever met. You're accountable to the parents that come into your buildings because your buildings, you don't get to levy a tax in order to build your schools. You're accountable to LSSU in terms of how things work, and you're accountable to yourselves at the end of the day. You're probably the most accountable public officials I have met, many times because you're figuring out for the first time by yourselves. But that is the biggest criticism that folks have. There's tons of literature on it, and hopefully we're going to start. I'm not going to give you all the answers walking out the door, but we're going to start that process and start some thinking. So how when people start talking to you about, oh, you're not accountable to anybody, you'll actually be able to give a thoughtful and purposeful answer, and you'll be able to live it in your schools. Shared accountability, it's a guarded trust. You have to rely on the operational team to discharge your functions. You have to. Quick anecdote. Jim had a family situation. Jim Gunner, our president and CEO, he was going to be here today. Had a family situation he had to take off. He basically says, hey, Joe, Jason, Julie, just knock it out of the park without me. And the fact of the matter is, he didn't have to review our slide decks. We didn't have to tell him what we were going to say. We didn't have to clear anything with anybody in order to come out here and be able to present to you guys today. We coordinated as a team. We know what the vision of the organization is, and that's the latitude that we have operationally. We know what the goal is because we got an agenda and we got some goals for you guys. So we wove that goal into a set of presentations, but we're not checking back in at the end of the day to figure anything out. And that in microcosm is the relationship. It's easy for us, in that sense, but that in microcosm is the relationship that we would encourage you guys to have with your operations team. And some people do it better than others. Some people think they're knocking it out of the park, but if you ask your operational team, are we knocking it out of the park, they might give you a candid answer that maybe you're not. Maybe you're too much on my back. Why have we gone through so many principles in such a short period of time? Why is it that we've got turnover in particular classrooms or subject matters? Why is it that no matter what we do, we simply can't seem to break that plateau on test scores, right? Those kinds of things are symptoms of a greater question, which is how are we working not as a board, but as a board and an operational team together in order to try to achieve the goals in our chart. There's a lot of literature on this one. The problem is nature abhors a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the operational team is lying down on the job, if the operational team is not delivering results, you as board members are going to get sucked into trying to fix the problem. So Julie had some very purposeful questions she put out at the end of her presentation, her slide deck last time. And those are very purposeful questions because they say ask questions and understand, and then say what is the operational team doing to fix whatever issues are identified. It's not, well, let's go into the classroom and try a new teaching technique. It's not, I had a board at a school that I got hired by MAPSA to draft an amicus brief in a National Labor Relations Board issue. And that school board was being charged with being a co-employer with the management company, which would have meant that they would have been stuck paying MIPSers. You're laughing, you know the issue?
But it's,
Yeah. So I got hired to do an amicus brief, and actually, rather than write the amicus brief, I just persuaded all the parties to actually talk to each other, which actually solved the problem a lot much better. But I made far less money that way. The winter's been so bad, it's been so cold in our offices, we've had in my law office, we've all had our hands in our own pockets. But the problem was we had board members that were watching what was going on in the classrooms through the closed circuit TV cameras, and if they didn't like the teaching techniques that were being deployed in the classrooms, they were marching into the classrooms and correcting the teachers. The board wasn't happy
with what was going on educationally in the program. And look, they may have had every right to be. I'm not saying that the school was knocked it out of the park academically. And so they were hiring consultants on their own to come in and tell the management company what to do. That creates issues. But what happens is they weren't doing it because they were bad people. They were doing it because they absolutely loved the kids in the classroom. They were doing it because they absolutely wanted to break out of the rut. They were doing it because they absolutely felt it was their duty as public officials who swore an oath to make sure good things were happening in the school. And nature abhors a vacuum. They unwittingly pulled the whole house of cards down on top of them and could have had a very, very bad result. So when I say nature abhors a vacuum, what I mean is don't become embroiled in the weeds on these types of issues. We're going to talk about how that works a little bit. But sometimes, we all look at the world through our lens. I do conflict for a living. I try to resolve conflict as best as possible. But sometimes, this is not going to be news to anybody, administrators will want you to become embroiled. Administrators will want you to be, or members of the ops team or parents who want you to be embroiled because they have an issue. And they're going to say, well, there's this vacuum. This is not being addressed. And of course, because nature abhors a vacuum, you're going to be tempted to step right in and do it. In the collective bargaining scenario, I do a fair amount of K-12 collective bargaining. This is how it works. Your contract with the union is at impasse, right? You can't agree. You guys have all read stories about how, these K-12 districts can't agree with what's going on. And so what is the first thing, and love the MEA, they're great people, but what's the first thing in their playbook? Try to make a board member a hero. How do you try to make the board member a hero? You go to the board member, you take him out for coffee, you take him out for lunch, you say, we can't solve this contract. Only you, Mr. or Mrs. Board Member, can solve this contract if you would just bargain with us instead of having the district's chief negotiator bargain with us. Creating an issue, creating a vacuum, begging you to step in. Don't do it. Parents come to you, they don't like what's going on in the school, they don't like this particular technique, they want you to intervene in a board meeting. I've seen it time and time again. Jump all over the administration, asking how to solve this problem. Don't do that. You get your board packet, you've got an opportunity to talk to the school leader, to the management company. Hey, here's this problem that came to me, would you please take a look at it, address it, get back to me. We're all good. If you don't like the answer, it's, I don't like the answer, I don't think that's an appropriate answer, I'd like you to go back and take a look at it and tell me how to address it. But unfortunately, one of the things that we're bound by is our charter contract and the board policies we've adopted. So if we're in a place where we're giving a lot of control to our agents, the management company or the third-party employer, we got to live by those rules. Those are the rules we set for ourselves, so we can't necessarily jump. Nature abhors a vacuum. Please remember that. Don't get sucked into the vacuum. The Mary Delagardi, the Lighthouse Inquiry, 5 roles of the board. This is a little bit different than Covey, but setting clear expectations, right? We have a charter contract that we had an opportunity to deal with educational goals in that contract. Those are clear expectations. Know the educational goals in your charter contract. They can't be any clearer. If you don't know the eduspeak in them, and I sure as heck don't, if you don't know the eduspeak in the operational goals, talk to the management company, make sure you understand it, talk to the school leader. Talk to LSSU, talk to Julie. Make sure you understand those educational goals. Hold the board and staff accountable for meeting expectations. Staff is her word, not mine, Jason. Hold the board and staff, the operational team, accountable for meeting those expectations. We were supposed to hit this growth target. We didn't hit the growth target. How are we going to hit the growth target next year? Don't say we didn't hit the growth target, so we need to throw the educational program out and come up with a new curriculum. That's stepping into the vacuum, right? How are we going to do it? You haven't done it. If you don't do it, there's going to be a consequence. What's the consequence? We may not renew your contract. We may ask Lake Superior to come and intervene and give us help. But that's not wading into the vacuum. That's saying you're being held accountable to the expectations. Your contract expires in 3 years. I'm working with a school right now. The management company was getting 11% of gross state aid, which is state aid in categoricals. 12 years ago when the school was founded, that was $200,000. This year when there are 2,400 kids, it's $2 million. The school has not moved a jot in terms of educational advancement. So the contract is up for review, and the board is saying, help us figure it out. So we're giving clear expectations. It's no longer 11%. It's south of 8%, and if you want to get 11%, you're going to have a year's worth of improvement for this cohort of kids that have been there for 3 years or longer. You're not wading into it. You're not going into the classroom telling people how to teach. You're not doing anything of the sort. You're basically saying, expectation, what we need to do. You don't do it, there's a consequence. Create conditions for success. Same thing. Open dialogue. Same stuff we're talking about. Strategic planning. Delegate. Tell folks you're in charge. You know, do you really want to be in a position where, what is it that Jim always says? You know, do you really want to be in a position where, you know, you've got a job? You don't have a job in schools. Education is so insanely complicated. You don't have a job. You've got responsibilities. What are those responsibilities? Go ahead. If you want to be, at the end of the day, compensated and you want to be happy, discharge your responsibilities. And we won't question how you do it, as long as you do it ethically, morally, and within the confines of the law. Learn together as a board and a team, and I would add grow together with the administration and the operational team and the staff. These opportunities for strategic planning are really good. If they turn into whipping sessions, they're not productive at all. If they turn into gripe sessions, they're not productive at all. The best thing that you could possibly do, I think, is to have some form of moderated strategic planning or some form of strategic planning where we're all able to come together and say, what's our vision? Looking at something that's external to the relationship. What's external to the relationship? The charter is external to our relationship. The board policies are external to our relationship. Our growth targets or growth goals are external to our relationship. We can all sit around the table and talk about the best way to do that, given our various goals. But if we start looking internally and looking in at ourselves and the ways that we perceive we're falling short, we're just going to end up building a Tower of Babel. Right? Everyone know the Tower of Babel? Right? The great tower, this great edifice, tower to the sky. And the reason that it caved in was because all of a sudden they started speaking different languages. And that's what's going to happen. If we all start looking inside ourselves without having a structure that we're all comfortable with. The school leadership team. Ideally, we know the leader implements the vision of the board, but I guarantee you a board that's too hands off. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to clarify what you said, because we're starting to look at strategic planning. And you're saying that in that process, look at externals and not internals in that process? Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in strategic planning, should we look at externals and not internals? What I'm saying is that for strategic planning, we want to look at our goal. Our ultimate goal, which is hopefully going to be something that's external from the relationships that we have internally. And by looking at that goal, it's going to help us align the relationships that we have internally. But if we don't start with a goal in mind, remember, begin with the end in mind? If we don't begin with a goal in mind, and we begin instead by looking at our issues, and I'll hit that in a second, we'll never get beyond talking about our issues, and we will never look at the goal. The first slide I had with this session, what are we going to try to accomplish today? Why? Why was that the first slide I had in that session? The reason it's the first slide I have in the deck is it gives you a context that we can travel on together. It's the same thing with your question, which is an excellent one. How do we know where we're going? We can't assess if we don't know what our goal is. We can't evaluate if we don't have a context in which to evaluate. Make sense?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I want to focusing on the goals, and that's what your plan is to.
Absolutely.
Your plan is for, not necessarily for relationships within the organization.
I'm going to tell you, I think the relationships are going to follow from how you decide to
It's not
make the
how to
goals.
follow the goals. So
Correct.
relationships should follow that.
Correct. I don't think and so that makes sense.
So you get everybody on board with strategic planning, and the relationships come as a result of that.
Yeah. Somebody had asked yesterday, I can't remember who, Jason relayed the question to me, can we all get together and have a potluck? And not have to worry about Open Meetings Act issues and all this other good stuff. You know, now there's a whole spectrum on the Open Meetings Act in terms of how you deal with this. If the potluck is simply to figure out how we're going to relate to each other with, you know, we all have kids, we're all on board for this reason, what's our story, why do we like doing what we do, that's all good stuff. That's not deliberating. I'm not going to parse legalisms with you guys, but I'm just going to give you the rough and ready. That's not deliberating. That's not having a meeting behind closed doors. That's not a violation of the Open Meetings Act. As soon as you start talking about, oh, geez, the management company's doing this, or we wish we could do that, or blah, 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 now you got an Open Meetings Act issue. So the short answer is, you can have your potluck, and talk about how the kids are doing and what people are going to do in summer camp or how the grandkids are doing. But you may, depending on the situation in which you're having your potluck, you may have to prove a negative, which is always very difficult to do, which is that you never deliberated during the potluck, right? So there's risk associated with it. But there has got to be some way, as a board, you know, so many boards sometimes feel with the Open Meetings Act, lawyers like me push it because this is where we make our living, we feel that we have to have this rigid, you know, we wear our blinders, we come to the board table, we don't associate with our board members unless we're at the board table and bad things happen. There's got to be some way that we build a context, and a rich context for us to deal with these strategic planning issues, because we have to come together as a board to do it. A potluck is a wonderful way to do it. But I would submit to you that it doesn't matter if you have your strategic planning meetings, you're not going to be airing dirty laundry. You're going to be saying, and going back to your question, what's our goal? How do we get to our goal? Oh, we're falling short of our goal because our test scores aren't where they should be. Part of our strategic plan is we're going to have the school leader identify how we're going to raise our test scores. And we're going to bring that back and evaluate it. Okay, now what might be behind the scenes is, you know, the school leader is, you know, I don't know, doing all sorts of bad things, but that's not the dirty laundry that's being aired. The dirty laundry is we're interacting as adults. Why are we falling short of the goal? I represent East Detroit Public Schools. 4 years ago, we had an $8 million deficit on a $30 million budget. We came into the school district, you had a deficit elimination plan. Came into the process, how does this relate to charters? I'm trying to use K-12 stuff because it's different than the charter paradigm to bring into the charter paradigm so we can kind of identify lessons learned from the other side of the movie, so to speak. So $8 million deficit on a $30 million budget. We came into it, everybody was pointing their fingers. Holy smokes, at the administration because the administration didn't tell us what to do. It's the board because the board just spent like drunken sailors. You know, it was all the professionals because they didn't raise the red lights. It was the auditing firm because they didn't do this, that, or the other. It was everybody's fault. And when we started to deal with the issue, we ultimately got a 25% concession from the teachers who were represented by the American Federation of Teachers, bargained for 2 years, a 25% wage concession. Here's why. I swear to God, this is why. And everybody says why. I've been around the rubber chicken circuit talking about this. Here's why. Because we didn't blame. We said, here's where we are. How we got here is water under the bridge. If you want to be with us moving forward, we fix the problem. That's not airing dirty laundry. It's not. And now it just so happened through the process that some of the folks that had been involved in creating the problem, if you looked at it, were no longer with the district anymore. There was no nefarious plan to get rid of them. You know how they self-selected out? They self-selected out because we acted like adults. We said, however we got here, here's our goal. And I would urge you as you look at strategic planning, not to look at it from the perspective of we've got to fix somebody. Any therapist will tell you, you can't fix anybody, right? Somebody's got to want to change in order to move forward. We're not going to fix ourselves. What we're going to do is we can identify goals and we can identify steps along the path to reach the goals. Does any of this make sense? You guys kind of, okay. So the opportunity for collaboration begins with the first meeting of the development team. How many founding board members are here? Okay, first meeting of the development team. The first time you guys sit down at, I don't know, the back room of a restaurant to kind of hear what the project is, or you get together at a MAPS event and you start talking about it, that's where the opportunity for collaboration begins. Collaboration. Labor is the root of collaborate. Co-labor. So the point is that when we begin to put a charter school together, when we begin to say, how are we going to win for kids, this doesn't feel very interactive. I'm sorry. You guys got to start hitting me with questions. But when we begin to try to win for kids in this process, we don't just turn it over to the management company. We don't just turn it over and say, okay, you guys, fix it for us. We'll just be around and we'll be here, fix it. No, collaborate. The management company may have, let's say, National Heritage has been in the news lately. Let's talk about National Heritage. They may have processes. They may have a secret sauce in terms of how they do things. But it doesn't prevent you from asking questions to try to figure out how that secret sauce works. And I tell you, I know their servicing reps. They'll answer your questions. They'll give you more answer than you could possibly want. If it's a third-party staffing company that's putting this together around a dynamic school leader or a core of people that want to put a school together, the questions are, how are we going to make this work? Who has the content knowledge to be able to live within the requirements of our charter? What does our charter say? That's where the opportunity begins. And what that does at the beginning of every relationship, it's so important to set those boundaries. And those boundaries become habits. And those habits become the mud that you get stuck in and want to fix when you have strategic planning, further on down the road. Don't get stuck in the mud, right? The very first meeting is the opportunity to collaborate. And every meeting thereafter is the opportunity to collaborate. Ask questions to try to figure out where things are going. And those are the types of things that I think will help boards transition from founding boards to operational boards. I was in California a couple weeks ago dealing with a very, very strong school leader, phenomenal person. She had begun this school out of nothing, charter school, incredibly successful area in an incredibly high poverty area of Los Angeles. She was getting ready to leave. She was just, 8 years of running the school. She wanted to do something else. She wanted to transition out. She had a group of veteran founding board members that were all in, and they didn't want her to leave. They weren't going to let her leave. And what we did through the strategic planning process was, this is interesting. I mean, there's no magic here, right? There's no magic. I'm not going to sit behind the door with any magic. What we did for the strategic planning process was we all sat around a table, and I urged every single board member that was a veteran board member to tell their story. We spent the day doing this. How did they get contacted by the school leader? What was it that put them on fire about the school? Why did they love the school leader so much? We had the school leader talk about the process for getting the charter. And then we had the new board members that were, hopefully going to be fed into the process, talk about why they were attracted to the school, talk about, what it was that they wanted to do to change things, talk about how these things could move forward. And we designated a strategic planning committee that consisted of one veteran board member, one new board member, and the school leader. Well, as part of it, they had to go through this grieving process. We're going to lose our school leader, we want to be angry, we're going to bargain, we're going to do all these things. And what ended up happening through the process was the school leader's in a position where now she can move on very well. Her board feels comfortable that she's not just going to run away from them. That the new board members now feel like they're part of the veteran board. They feel like veterans, having listened to the story 8 times during a very hot Saturday. They feel like veterans with this process. There's no magic there. There are no tabletop exercises or anything. It's just a matter of learning what the goals are, what the outcomes are, and relating to them as grown-ups. Does any of this stuff make sense? Okay. So, goals for leadership and collaboration. It's necessary to ensure that we answer the 2 most fundamental questions: kids learning, money saving. Right? Kids learning, money saving. The tools for collaboration. I think the single most important tool, if we're going to look at something that's external to ourselves as a tool, is that charter contract. I also urge folks, I represent a couple authorizing bodies, and one of the things that I am very proud of myself for having been able to do is to incorporate the application into the charter contract as a schedule. Very many times, the transition between a founding board and an operational board, and when I mean operational, I don't mean that the founding board founds and the operational board operates. It's my kind of quick and dirty reference for a board board members that aren't there at the founding of the school and then are in and fed into the process through the operations of the school. Right? Many, many times, the charter contract, the legal document, was drafted by lawyers. I drafted a few, a bunch of other lawyers drafted a few. I mean, it's a cut and dry document. The sections are required by statute. The charter contract is a compromise between competing political interests in Lansing. The application is the heart and soul of the school. The application is what got your founding board members excited about being on the board. The application, is probably what caused people to want to be part of this process to begin with. So reading the charter contract is going to help you, but reading the application, whether it's part of the charter contract or not, reading the application will give you hopefully the feel, why are we doing a blended learning program? We're doing a blended learning program because if we don't do blended learning, we can lose a certain percentage of the students that are with us. Why are we doing a traditional public ed program? We're doing a traditional public ed program because where we are right now, the effects of poverty are so striking. We want to have a rigorous academic program that's going to prepare kids to succeed. but we want it to look more traditional. You know, oh, why are we doing a program that has a character education component to us? We're doing a character education component because we feel that, you know, in the age of competing interests and video games and all this other good stuff, that sometimes these types of things can get lost. The application tells you that in a way the charter can't. The application tells you that in a way that is more raw and real than a charter can. And the application tells you that it was the, you know, it's like the Constitution, right? It's this founding document. What was the intent of the school? So as we go through strategic planning and we look at the outcomes, our goals, what we want to do, how do those goals relate to what we said we were going to do? And if we've made changes, why have we made changes? Have we made changes because of expedience? Have we made changes because there's a different vision? And if we have, are we all behind those changes? Very good place to look is that application. Effective and well-considered policies and guidelines. Those are also a good place to look. Many, many times, you know, and look, I'm guilty of it. We have a policy service. We'll sell you a 500-page policy deck that has every contingency under the sun planned for. But one of the things we're doing is changing that policy service so it's less about pushing commas around and figuring out what's on different pages and more about trying to integrate the policies into the overall operation of the school. If you have a policy deck and you don't know what the policies say, you don't have to know them word for word, but kind of understand what the flow of the policies are. Oh, we have policies that deal with governance. If a governance issue comes up, you can go to the governance section of policy. If, we got policies that deal with community relations. Oh, if a community relations issue comes up, we go to that section. Why do we do that? Because when we adopted those policies, we made a promise to our stakeholders. The promise that we made to our stakeholders was we were going to behave rationally and predictably. Rational, predictable behavior is the single biggest, this is a lot of studies on this, the single biggest predictor of how the public deems our credibility is. If we're not predictable in our behavior, if we're not able to say, okay, these are the things that we're going to do, and there will be very few exceptions, we don't look rational, we look arbitrary. The policies are the promises we made to our stakeholders. If you work with us, these are the rules that we're going to use in order to govern our own selves and to govern how we relate to you. So if we don't know what those policies say, we're at a real handicap. We're just making it up as we go along. And I guarantee you, any well thought out set of policies, whether they're our policies or National Heritage's policies or somebody else's policies, any well thought out set of policies will be a set of rules that are rational and can be used within the context of what you're doing. And if you don't like a policy, don't ignore it and say, oh, we're just going to disregard that, we're going to do whatever. If you don't like it, change it. It doesn't fit what we're doing. Right? It doesn't fit what we're doing. We don't like that policy, we're going to change it. But understand why you're changing it. Don't change it because you're trying to deal with the expediency of the moment. Change it because if you look at it, right, it's kind of the categorical imperative, right? We take the people out of the question and we say, how would we make moral choices that would be right and everybody can buy into in all circumstances? The way we do that is we take the personality and the specific issue out of it, right? How do we do that? It's the same thing with policies. Can this be generally applicable in all situations, regardless of the personalities or the crisis that we find ourselves in? And then the strategic planning process, which I'm hopefully doing a decent job on. Moving from good to great. Okay, here's where we're going to deal with our tabletop exercise. You've heard enough of me. Remember yesterday we talked about columns. Discipline people, discipline thought, discipline action, building greatness to last. So this is a great starting point for an examination of collaborative effort needed to effectively create a space where kids learn. What does this mean? These are good founding questions for how we're going to realize the goals of our strategic plan. These are good things to work into your strategic planning process. Collins framework is best implemented through the use of the diagnostic tool. You can find the diagnostic tool online. Hey, we should come out and go through the diagnostic tool with you. It's all fun. You're going to get to the same place no matter what. We don't have a lot of time, so really what I want to do is give you a flavor for how that would look. So what I'd like to do is maybe have you join these two ladies, and you guys back there join those two folks. And we're going to go through this tabletop exercise. And I just want to get a balance in terms of the table size. I think we're pretty balanced otherwise. I want to go through these tabletop exercises with you. have you guys report out as tables. It'll take us a little over our time. Are you guys okay with that? Sure. If we have you report out as tables on what we're doing. First one, confront the brutal facts. This is an interesting one. There's a guy by the name of James Stockdale. Has anybody here read Good to Great? Okay, so you know the Stockdale paradox, right?
I know James Stockdale, why?
You don't know that? So James Stockdale, Admiral James Stockdale, was a POW captive for, I think, decades after he got shot down during a combat flight in Korea. And the Stockdale paradox is this. Stockdale knew he was going to get out. He knew he was going to get out alive. He promised himself every day, I will get out of this. I will persevere. I will get out of this alive. What he noticed, though, was that the most optimistic people, the people that would say, I'm going to get out by Christmas, I'm going to get out by Easter, I'm going to get out by next year, those folks succumbed to the brutality of the conditions and did not make it out alive. So the answer to the Stockdale paradox is this, right? That when we're confronted with an existential threat, when I say an existential threat, I mean a threat to our existence, a threat to how we're going to do business as usual. Maybe it's not just a threat to the existence of the academy as a public school academy. Maybe it's a threat to the values that the public school academy embodies. Maybe it's a threat to, maybe it's a situation where, a teacher did bad things to a kid in the classroom and it created an existential threat in our own minds as board members and civilized people as to how to deal with it and continue. You have this existential threat. How do you deal with it? By saying, yep, this is a big deal. Yes, I'm going to prevail, but also confronting the brutal facts. Stockdale solved the Stockdale paradox for himself by saying, I don't know when I'm going to get out. Every day is one day at a time. I will get out, but I am imprisoned. Somebody has control over me every day. I cannot help that. I'm just going to get through it. That's confronting the brutal facts. So, first exercise. How did the board and leadership develop the will to prevail while at the same time confronting the reality of the situation? So if you've had a situation with your school, we've had and maybe it's just the founding of the school, any number of things. How did the board and leadership work together? And that's the key part for strategic planning. How did you work together in a way that you think is constructive to resolve that issue? Or if you have an issue and you haven't had this out there yet, you haven't had an existential threat, and God bless you if you haven't, how will you work together to achieve your goals? Given the fact that academic achievement, as an example, is a really, really heavy lift. Just take 10 minutes. Do you guys understand the charge? Any questions on the charge? All right, rock and roll.
Come
We not there.
Get up there.
Our president at the time wanted to exert much control over signing. That just run the minor. So that's what I they are let's move on.